This podcast could potentially have adult language, adult themes, definitely drinking, and possibly the possibility of sexual content. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to Drinking with Authors, the podcast. I'm your host, Erica Lance. Our sponsor today is Skunk Brothers Spirits, coupon code DWA10. Get you in, veteran and family owned. My amazing co-host today is Danielle Orsino. Welcome.
Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're listening, because we love hearing your feedback.
Awesome. And for the second time on Drinking with Authors, our amazing guest is Rob Samborn. Woo! 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 Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, let's talk about what we're drinking. So I, again, was at the grocery store. We know how I like to do this. And I found another Angry Orchard hard fruit cider. Ooh. This one is peach mango. I was super excited to locate this.
That sounds good.
Yeah, I haven't tried it yet. I'm going to try it live on air, but it seemed amazing.
Here we go.
And it is peach mango. It is very amazing and not too sweet, actually. Much credit to Angry Orchard for not totally destroying it. Danielle, what are you drinking today?
Well, we're kind of twinsies, but not really. I'm going with my peach Celestial Seasonings peach tea. I'm still trying to kick the cough a little bit. So I'm in my little Rowan thermal mug, so it'll change colors as it cools down.
That's exciting. I like it. Okay, yeah. Rob, what are you drinking today?
I am drinking, first of all, thank you very much for having me on your show. I am thrilled to be back here for a second time. I had a great time the first time, and I'm excited to be drinking with my fellow authors. I am drinking something called Elkins Colorado Winter Whiskey. So Elkins, I like supporting the local distilleries. I live in Colorado, I live in Denver. And Elkins is based, I believe, in Estes Park, which is where I bought this, which is at the base of Rocky Mountain National Park. And they have some great whiskeys, also great vodkas. This is actually a flavored one that I thought was really good for the approaching winter time, as we're kind of in the middle of fall here. And I do want to get Skunk Brothers as well. I actually have that on my list. And I am going to start off with a shot of it in my trusty Drinking with Authors
swag. Woo! If you watch the YouTube, you guys get to see the swag. Anybody who's on the show gets our swag. Ooh. That is a pretty hefty shot glass, don't you think?
It is. I love this.
Yes.
And we also have this cup.
Oh, more Drinking with Authors swag
to go along with it. Yes.
Yeah.
But
very cool.
Kind of a fancy drink, even though that is a fancy cup, but I am going to be drinking from my fancy tumbler.
Oh, you should drink from fancy. So I have a question. You said it was flavored. Please tell me with the flannel on it that it has cinnamon in it.
It is cinnamony, yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I'm going to have to try that. That sounds amazing. I'm a cinnamon addict.
So am I. I love cinnamon. I don't know. I always assume everybody has seen every single episode of Seinfeld. So I'm just going to say, I don't know if you remember this particular episode, but there's one where Jerry is talking about his love for cinnamon. And he's like, it should be on every table right there with the salt and the pepper.
I don't remember that, but I actually agree. And if you're going to get Skunk Brothers, they have a cinnamon blueberry that it sounds weird saying cinnamon blueberry. When they sent it to me, I was like, this is awkward. This could be really bad, or it could be amazing. It was definitely one of those things where it was not going to be just kind of like, it was amazing. That was the first thing gone in my house. Cinnamon blueberry.
Have to try. Yeah, I don't drink too much flavored whiskey, but when there's cinnamon in it, especially like with the fall or winter weather, I'm down.
I agree. Okay, so this is your second time being on the show. So you have an announcement about a book too. Let's talk about that. Wait, real quick, you should tell everybody, just in case they didn't catch the first one, which if they didn't, go back and listen to the first one, but really brief what you write.
Yes. So my name is Rob Samborn. I am an author of dual timeline thrillers. The first book that I came out with is called The Prisoner of Paradise, which is this. which I just happen to have right next to me. And it is about an American couple who travel to Venice, Italy. And the husband comes to believe that his true soulmate is not his wife, but a woman who's been trapped in a Renaissance painting, the world's largest painting, actually, for about 450 years. And there are some secret societies, and he goes on this adventure to free her. And it becomes this very cool quest that also goes back in time to 1589. And that came out last year. And on October 25th, so a week from tomorrow, the second book in the series, called Painter of the Damned, will be.
Oh, I like that cover. That's nice.
Yeah, he did a great job. David Ter Avancian, I always butcher his name, but he's a phenomenal designer. And I actually last month released a spin-off novella. So these two books primarily take place in the present day, but about maybe 35% in the past. But because I write in two different timelines, I can kind of like go off on these branches, which is pretty cool. So last month, I also released a spin-off novella called The Swordsman of Venice. I'm showing it to you on my phone because it's an ebook only.
Oh, I like it.
Cool. Nice.
That's very cool. I'm all about novellas. We talked about that on the last show. Just keep spinning the worlds. Spin the worlds.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. So yes.
I like it. So 2 books, 2 years. That's pretty awesome. Because if I recall correctly, the first book took quite a while to get done. Correct?
It did. Yeah. So my speed has increased dramatically.
I would say so. So what was it like writing this second one?
A lot faster, right? When we were talking, I think actually you may have introduced me to the concept of rapid releasing. I don't know if I was familiar with it before that. Yeah.
She's good like that. Right.
I'm good like that. Like more.
Yeah,
let's have some more. Let's go.
Yeah. And so now, yeah. So the first one probably took a few years, and then it took probably about a year or two really to find my agent, maybe about a year, and then it took probably about a year for them to shop it around to publishers and get my publisher, and then everything was delayed by a year because of COVID, of course. The second one was just so much faster. First of all, I had a 3-book deal with my publisher, so we didn't have to deal with that. I had an agent, we didn't have to deal with that. Thank God we didn't have to deal with the COVID delays. And I wrote it in probably about a year, maybe even a little bit less. So just a much, much faster process all around. And right now I'm writing book 3, which I'm hoping will take a total, I've been writing it, but I'm hoping it'll take a total of about 6 months to write.
Very cool. Look at you speeding up. We talked about that, and that's awesome. That's super exciting. Yeah. So what about spin-off novellas? Are there more in the works? Because the little side stories, we talked about that. Gotta love the side stories.
Yes, there are more in the works. So this particular one, The Swordsman of Venice, is part 1. And I'm going to continue that either for 2 or 3 parts. Yeah. And then if all goes well, I might pick another point in time and continue another vein out from that. And then also at the same time, I have an idea of basically taking one or two of the main characters of this series and kind of going in a similar but different direction with it.
I think that's a great idea. I think that especially as you develop fans, and Danielle has how many books now out in your series?
5 plus 1 novella, and we're working on book 6.
Yes. So I met Danielle a little over a year and a half ago. Similarly, she was at 1. So just an idea. I should be a author motivational speaker. Like to put some more books out.
Danielle, what do you write?
I write fantasy, epic, high fantasy, but we're heading into urban fantasy horror kind of next after book 6.
And that's what I was going to bring up, is that she's doing book 6, not that the storyline doesn't continue, and like your characters, a storyline can continue, but this is a switch to some other characters, but in almost a different vein. And that's what's cool about it, is you can grab it, and her books go from high fantasy to urban horror, which is really awesome and exciting to do stuff like that. But I'm so excited that your second book is out. So what would you say the differences are now for you? Because you had a speed, you thought you were going at that speed, and now you have a new speed. What is that like?
Yeah, well, I guess there's two sides of it. There's the publishing side and there's the writing side. So the publishing side is pretty obvious as to why it's so much faster. But on the writing side, personally, I mean, I think it's just my my craft and my skills have improved dramatically. I would imagine it's kind of like anything, you know, in any type of career, you just get more used to it and you get better at it doing it. You know, when I first started out, so I come from a screenwriting background, actually. So not all, but most of my writing education is in screenwriting, which has its own unique challenges and obstacles and all of that. But the writing methodology of it is pretty different. You know, it's a lot closer maybe to poetry than it is to prose. You're almost kind of writing down as if the film reel was going forward. And, you know, you can literally have a one-word sentence. You know, so it does have challenges where you don't want to necessarily do things, and they're kind of like unwritten rules, or not necessarily grammatical rules. But at the flip side to that is you don't necessarily need to make sure every single sentence is grammatically perfect. So,
That's true.
So I actually wrote The Prisoner of Paradise as a script originally. And it was optioned by a production company founded by DreamWorks execs, but it was never made into a movie. And then when the rights reverted back to me, I decided to adapt it into a book with the brilliant idea of, yeah, I'll just knock it out and have it done, and then I'll have the screenplay ready to go to make it into a movie.
Oh, I think that's brilliant. Not a lot of authors have the option of having the screenplay, because a lot of times things can get opted, and it's having a screenplay opted from your book is very, very interesting, because you get excited as an author. Me and Danielle have talked about this a little bit on the podcast before. We haven't touched it very much, though. You get excited as an author, but sometimes you have to go, wait a minute, why are they opting this? And what else is out there that's similar? And are they opting to shelve? Because that happens sometimes, is they opt to shelves and go, we have something like this, or so, you know, we're going to put it on a shelf so nobody else goes and makes this epic thing, you know, that happens.
That can happen. It's true. Yeah, but the book evolved organically. First of all, I never intended to write it as a series. It was always supposed to be a standalone. And for anybody watching, you can read this one as a standalone too. This is the second one. But it organically evolved into a series, which was a really cool process. So if I were ever to shop it around as a script, I would actually have to go back and completely rewrite it. Yeah. But getting back to your question, so when I first really delved into novel writing, I didn't know, you know, I knew how to write, but there were certain nuances, I think, that you don't necessarily know unless you are, you know, you go to school as an English major, or you are trained in writing and all that kind of stuff, which, like perspective and things like that, and active writing. So all those kind of little things that I had never learned, that I needed to learn along the way. So because I knew all that going into book 2 and even the novella, that automatically improved my speed. So I was like, I didn't have to go back and kind of trash half of it.
No, and that's good. I think it's really, you know, people talk about, and then they go right, and then they get rid of it. And I just think to myself that, you know, that happens. All of us trash parts of things we've written because they seemed epically brilliant at the time we decided to type them or write them out. And then we read them and we're like, what the F was I thinking at that time? Like, I don't even know who's this character? It wasn't even in the book. Like, what am I doing here? That maybe happens to me when I've been drinking too much and I decide to write. I always think it's a great idea to have like a bottle of wine and go write. By the way, Inner Erica, it's never a good idea. About a third of the bottle in, I'm good. But 2/3 in, and then the bottle,
we all have our inner Hemingways.
Oh yeah, no, epic stories that have nothing to do with whatever the work in progress I'm working on is. But I do think it's interesting once you can start getting more into the rhythm, and to your point, it's a honed skill where you get better at kind of knowing what the fluff is, or you don't go down that path as much of writing something that you're going to end up throwing away. Like you start to know, like, this isn't good at all, you know?
Yeah, you get better at both the craft and the content. You know, the actual specific techniques and skills of writing. It's kind of like playing an instrument, actually. You know, it's like once you learn how, it's a lot harder to write a song when you don't know how to play the instrument. You know?
Very true. Very true. No, I agree. So so where are we then? Because these two are published. What are we working on right now?
So, well, this one still has a week and a day to go.
I know, but it's already done. It's in the can.
I'm
it's in the can, buddy.
On it, right. So I'm working on two things. So one is book 3 for that.
That's exciting.
Yes. And the other is a script. So I still am screenwriting, and a wonderful author named Laura Kemp, who has written a series called the Lantern Creek series. I don't know if you know her. Her first book is called Evening in the Yellow Wood, and it's kind of like Americana paranormal. It's sort of a multi-genre book. It takes place in northern Michigan, and it's about the paranormal, but there's also like some romance in there too. And she actually hired me to adapt her book into a screenplay, which I'm working on as well. And that's a really fun project.
So how is that working with an author on it? Not her specifically. I do know who she is. I've heard of her. But I think that is kind of fascinating because you're the author. So you working on your scripts, you're the only audience that has to be like, this is the part of the story I want to tell. Because to your point, and anybody who doesn't understand the difference truly between screenwriting and writing should pick up a screenplay to their favorite movie. Whatever that movie is, you can find them all over the place. Pick up the screenplay and read it, and you'll see, even if there's a lot of monologuing on a page, which some, stories have great monologuing or great conversations, there is probably a quarter of text on that page in comparison to what would be in a novel, even if there's heavy monologue. Right. And it's usually about 120 minutes or so, give or take, if you're not Peter Jackson and making it like a 12-hour epic movie. And so you have to pick what parts of the story in the book that you're going to tell in the screenplay. And I kind of think a lot of authors don't think like that. So I would love for you to talk about for a minute what that's like, A, doing that, and B, working with an author whose precious little baby is that book.
You're about to cut up.
Have to chop down.
Yeah, I hear you. Those are fantastic questions. And I do think, like kind of what you're saying, I would highly recommend that any novelist, at least, you don't have to study screenwriting, but at least kind of familiarize yourself with it, because it is a different beast, but it's like a different way of looking at the same story. And especially a movie that was adapted from a book. The Lord of the Rings notwithstanding.
Hey, some argue that he made it better. I actually agree with them because I think.
Oh yeah, I don't mean that.
Yeah,
I do actually.
But it's a long one.
It's right. I was talking about the length. Yeah, there's tons of movies that I think are actually better than the books. But in that case, it's just so long. I meant more specifically about what you were talking about, how you have these very, very, very tight time constraints, especially if you're writing a spec script. And for those in the audience who aren't familiar with that terminology, it means when you're writing it's not like speculative fiction in books, but you're writing a movie based on speculation, which means that you're just writing it out and then you're sending it out. So no one's hired you to write it, for example. So it's a very interesting exercise to look to see what's been cut, right? Like what scenes have been cut, how those scenes in a book that might be a whole chapter has been condensed to maybe just 2 or 3 minutes. And a lot of novelists, when they look at the screenplays, are like, my God, this is so short. But when you're watching movies and TV, you don't necessarily realize it, but the average scene is only 2 minutes in length. That's it. which translates to only 2 pages. So it's like a page per minute is a general rule of thumb. So it's a phenomenal exercise to know how to really weed out what you don't necessarily need, like trim the fat. So that's a pretty cool thing, and that I would definitely recommend people doing. And by the way, one of the best writing classes that I had ever taken was an acting class. And that's for
Really?
both.
Heard that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that.
That's for both books and screenplays. And the reason why is because the actors look at the parts completely from the perspective of the character. And obviously, as writers, we try to do that. And, I'm not speaking for every single writer, but I don't really, I'm just kind of like, okay, what are they going to do? I have my character studies and I know their paths, I know their traits and their personalities, but the actors talk about like really committing to the roles and the parts. They need to become that person and commit. They're always talking about committing. And what is my motivation for every single scene? Like, I'm committing to this role. What is my motivation as this particular person? And like, they totally transform, the best actors you can't even recognize when they're a different person. So it made me think about the writing from that character's perspective a little bit more, really thinking about like, what is their motivation and committing to that within each scene and then along the whole entire story arc. And then in terms of to answer your second question, so Laura has been absolutely phenomenal to work with. I could not have asked for a better writing partner and someone to adapt their book. She has been totally understanding of the need to change things. And it's been a really, really interesting process. This is the second book that I've adapted to a screenplay. The first was a book that was written in like 1925 or something like that. So the author died decades ago, and I could it's in the public domain, and I could basically do what I want. But it was a fairly kind of linear story that I didn't really need to change that much. I did change it actually quite a bit, but it wasn't as challenging. So Laura's book is amazing, and it's very challenging in the sense that I don't want to cut anything, but I need to. And I need to kind of shift stuff around. Like the book, for example, takes place over probably a period of maybe like 3 or 4 months. And the script is going to take place over a period of about 3 or 4 days. And
oh, no, that's a huge difference.
Yeah, so we have to like move things around, scenes and timing and all that. We're gonna have to cut characters because of that. So it's almost like doing major organ transplants and open heart surgery, shifting those organs around and creating a new thing and sewing it all back up. But I think it's going to be really good.
Frankensteining that book. Do you see
Yes,
that analogy?
I did not. I specifically
like
did not want to use that word because you get this impression that it's going to be an ugly monster. It's not. It's going to be this.
Listen, Frankenstein is a very reputable monster. He has been
That's
around
true.
a very
the
long
book
time.
Wise, yes, it's true. Talk about differences from books to movies and stories. I mean, the book Frankenstein is dramatically different from pretty much any Frankenstein movie that's ever come out.
No, I don't know. The one with what is his name from Harry Potter? Daniel Radcliffe. Did you see that one? That one was pretty close, I think.
No, is that I, Frankenstein? No, that's the one with
yeah. No, I don't remember the name of it, but I could have sworn maybe it was him. But it's close. It's interesting you say that because taking it and doing that. So I haven't watched it yet. But I finished the audiobook of Where the Crawdads Sing, which was, I really love the audiobook. I have way more time because I have to drive around doing stuff all the time to listen to audiobooks than unfortunately read. I wish I had more time for that. But, and I miss reading, but the audiobooks are good. And then somebody told me, and I'm no spoilers here, some of the stuff they changed. And I literally, a friend of mine was like, you got to tell me if it's good. And I can't bring myself to watch it because of what I was told was changed is the core of that particular story, right? Mm. And it's very interesting because I realized, though, looking at it, a lot of that story is told as an inner monologue. Like it's told from her perspective of the world around her, right? And I think a lot of people don't realize you can sometimes have that come to bear, like the book and the TV show You, which the TV show is very, very similar to the book You, but that character's inner monologue, that's the entire book. If you've ever read You, which I really recommend you do, because it is one of the few books that is totally written from inside this guy's head. It is not told at all from any other character's perspective. And I'm not talking first person. I'm talking about literally how he perceives the world. So the actions that he does are completely through his lens. And most first person, even though it's being told from that person's point of view, the actions are occurring around them the way it's written. Even when I write from first person, it's not what my character's interpretation, but if you read or listen to You, the voice actor is amazing for that too. It's just brilliant writing, right? Even if you're not into horrors, it's just brilliant writing, because she's literally like every action the girl takes in it. If you haven't seen You, it's about a guy who is a stalker at the base minimum, but probably could be defined way worse than that. But I don't want to give it away if you haven't watched the show or read the book. But he finds a girl that he likes, but everything she does is he's like, she's doing this thing obviously for this reason. Like he puts the reasoning in his head, right? So that was done well. But then again, the entire show is filmed again from his perspective and him monologuing over it. But you can't do that with movies all the time. You can't monologue. They were thinking this. And I think a lot of times as writers, we have inner monologue that's happening. Hopefully not a ton, but we have it. And that inner monologue does not translate to the screen 99% of the time.
It's too much exposition.
Yeah. You can't have a character that he looked at her, you know, she looked at him disdainfully thinking what a bastard he was. She literally has to go, "You're a bastard." Yeah. Or just look disdainfully and hopefully the actress is good enough that the audience picks up on it. But you don't get, he's a bastard of overriding. You know?
If you can't film it, you can't put it on the page.
Yeah,
exactly.
Some very, very, very rare exceptions, I should say.
No, it's true. That's why I was giving that one rare exception. But again, the book, everything is, the show is told from him. You don't see the other people. You see his perception of what the other people did. Right. Yeah, and that's interesting.
Cool.
Okay, we're going to take a quick. Yeah, I would. I think it's amazing that they translated that well. I will say season 2 does not exactly follow the book. Very loose, but if you read the book and then watch the season, you understand why. And there is no book 3. So season 3 was just them Games of Throning that shit. So, you know, we don't have book 7. That's what happens. But we will be right back with Drinking with Authors.
Sample locally sourced, quality distilled spirits in the beautiful Columbia River Gorge. At Skunk Brothers Distillery, we're family-owned, brewing small batch grain-to-bottle spirits, just like our grandfather did back in the Prohibition era. From handcrafted bourbons and moonshine to flavored blends and cordials infused with local fruit. Join us for a tasting tour and buy Skunk Brothers spirits straight from the source.
It's all in the family at Skunk Brothers Spirits, located in Stevenson, Washington.
Okay. Oh, Danielle has a screenwriting that I started recording just as she said things and stuff. Danielle, my darling, please.
I'm sorry. I just have a question because of, as I'm writing, I had to write a pilot for my book, and my biggest thing was exposition. That was like, you know, it was hard for me with that. And they asked me to add a character that came in later in the book, and can you introduce him earlier? Could we, you know? So once again, I was probably Frankensteining some things. What happens when you're writing a screenplay and you have to do that for an author and go back and say, oh, we're going to take this character or we're going to add a totally new character? Have you had that happen before? And what's the author's reaction been?
Yeah, I have done that on multiple occasions, actually, in both projects of the adaptations. And I would say that probably adapting exposition from a book into a script is one of the trickiest parts. So that, and of course the timing of it and condensing everything into, and by the way, 120 pages is kind of on the long side. We're shooting for this particular genre, ideally like 112. And honestly, at this point, it's like every page counts. And right now I'm probably like at 140. So I need to do some serious slicing and dicing. And part of it is to do exactly what you're talking about. You might have to introduce people earlier. You might have to combine characters. You might have to combine scenes or move locations, things like that. And so the author whose book I'm adapting, Laura Kemp, again, she's been totally wonderful and understanding about all of this. She just want to make sure that the core story is there, which it is. And the main characters are there, which they are. We're not removing any of them or anything like that. And this is also the first of a series. So she wants to make sure that anything in the first script wouldn't necessarily affect any sequels. But otherwise, she's been completely open, which is fantastic. It makes my life a lot easier.
How does this affect as you're writing now? Now looking at it from an author, now you have your own book. So are you looking at the screen adaptation and working with another author a little differently with maybe either more sensitivity or renewed eyes?
I mean, in terms of writing my own books?
Well, just now that you're an author and that you have your babies now, okay, you have your books and now you're working with an author. So do you have a different perspective a little bit?
Oh, are you saying like, am I a little bit more sensitive to her?
Yeah, just in general, are you looking at it just a little differently, or are you kind of going in with the same scalpel, like, nope, this is going?
Honestly, I'm kind of going in with the same scalpel. Like, I wouldn't want to change any of the core story anyway,
of
or
course,
any of the main characters. But I think the way I'm looking at it with that scalpel is how to actually bring that core story and the main characters out. Okay. And so unfortunately, if there is like a C or D storyline, that may need to be cut. And actually, we already have cut it. And I talk with her about it. If there's something big, like a whole kind of side storyline, I'm like, are you okay if we cut this? And she's like, yeah, you got to kill your darlings. So I would say, to be honest, I'm not really that much more sensitive because it just needs to be done. You kind of have to have that surgeon approach. But with my own work, I've been screenwriting for a pretty long time, but this particular project has made me kind of look at trimming the fat even more. So I actually outlined book 2 and book 3 together. But I think with book 3 now, I'm making it even kind of just like more of like a page turner. Like I do think all my books are page turners, but they're kind of getting even more into that without sacrificing that inner monologue that you need in books. Mm-hmm. In fact, actually going back to one of your earlier questions, Erica, so with my first draft, my agents told me, they're like, yeah, it reads too much like a screenplay. You need more nonverbal cues and inner monologue and body language and things like that. So I think I've gotten pretty good at that balance. So, but it's a pretty cool exercise to look at the screenwriting style of it.
No, totally. It's interesting because you saying that brought to mind, I was talking to somebody the other day about screenwriting, and I've done screenwriting and I've done playwriting, not as much as you, but I've written plays, even short ones that have done live, right? And I was, recently I was writing a fight scene that was in a book, and it was just like a fist fight scene. It wasn't like, epic swords, and I didn't have to have a bunch of dolls to figure out, so they didn't have 12 arms. But I realized as I was typing it, I'm like, if I was watching this would be much more impactful, right? The actual violence in front of the screen of the punching and the kicking and, all of that stuff that happens, versus when you're trying to convey that level of suddenness or violence, it's not in the action that's being taken to me. It's in the other stuff around it. How is the character feeling about that? How did that impact? They didn't see it coming, like you almost have to.
The pain that they actually feel. That you're not relying on an actor's expressions to convey, but you're actually getting into someone's head.
And it's interesting because, we always talk about how the books are better than the movies. And I think a lot of times the books can be better because you're not on a shortened story. Like you have the whole world that has been opened up to you versus I'm going to tell you this one tale about this thing. And you briefly touched on it. I love that we're talking about screenplays here, so hopefully you don't mind. But this is very rarely do we talk to screenplay people. But I think one of the things that's interesting is you talked about taking a character and having it be an amalgamation of multiple characters, right? And I think some people get frustrated that they don't see the character that they most bond with. And I'm going to go back to our original thing, like Arwen in Lord of the Rings has a very different role in the books than she does in the movie that Peter Jackson did, right? Not only that, there are not a lot of females in those books. Just for the record, if you go read those books, there are not teeming with female characters by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah.
Right? So, it's interesting because I heard a lot of Tolkien fans were not as thrilled with what they did with Arwen, for instance, as what they needed. But if you look back and look at the movie, you go, this needed to happen. She needed to be a part for this to have Aragorn have his journey the way he has it, because she acted as this plot twist point like 4 times in the book, and even for Frodo and stuff. Like that's what she was like put there. Hi, I'm going to help move this story along by this little scene I'm in this action I'm taking, So it's interesting that you were talking about that, and how do you do that without completely losing that character that everybody fell in love with, that side character.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic. I mean, really, you're telling the same story in 2 different ways. And if you think about it, oftentimes there's 500 ways to tell a story, right? It's just like, what's the best for that particular medium, And if you're going to do a play, it would be different as well. I'm sure there's probably going to be a Lord of the Rings play. Musical.
Probably.
They would have a hard time with that. That would be a lot of set decoration. There are some things that you just go, that would be a lot of set decoration if you decided to fill that off.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I also think it's different when you do plays and there's a live component versus you're seeing a component, right? Because I think having been an actor on plays and musicals and stuff like that many moons ago, and written plays versus screenplays, there is definitely a show me thing, but the actors can convey an emotion that can wash over the crowd if they're good actors.
Yeah.
It is different. I mean, you can still see it on screen, and people who are actors on screen do brilliantly, but it's very different when you can feel that tenseness or feel the fear or the love or whatever live and in person.
Yeah, of course. And the other interesting thing about plays is that you only had it from one view, from one angle, right? Like you can, with a book, you can go, 360 degrees and in different universes or whatever, planes of dimension, literally anything you could possibly think of. With a movie and TV show, it's not exactly to that point, but because you can't get inner monologue necessarily unless you're actually kind of doing, sort of can, I guess. But with a play, you really can only see it from one angle, right? You can't go behind or above or anything like that. So you have to work your story in the way you're telling your story from that perspective.
Yeah, one of the funnest things I ever got to do, and they do it every year, it's in Tampa. There's a literary organization called Wordier Than Thou. It's actually how this entire podcast, which started as a live event, began. But they do a thing called Read No More. And they do little plays that in a live haunted house that you walk through. So unlike a haunted house where you jump scares, they do live plays. And writing live plays where people are standing in front of you. I remember the first time I did it, and I'll tell you, it is a very different situation because it's a house. They do this in a house. They did it during COVID at a camp. It was like an 80s sleepaway camp kind of, Jason thing where there was enough distance between humans that they could do it. But the first one I wrote, I actually had a bunch of teenage actors that came in and did this entire play. And I'll tell you, it was very interesting writing when the audience is going to be standing less than 5 feet from your actors in a room. Mine was a kitchen at the time, interacting with them. It's a different writing style and a different, like, show me, you know, and how do you do that and how do you convey it, you know?
Totally.
And
Yeah.
they didn't have a lot of room to move. This was a galley kitchen. It wasn't like they could storm across the stage to prove a point. They had like 3 feet, you know?
And I think thinking about the different ways that you can possibly tell a story makes you a better writer, regardless of what medium you are telling that story in. You know, if you look at other things like comic books or graphic novels, you can tell the same story in a different kind of visual way in that sense. Or, you know, radio shows. I guess, you know, most audiobooks are narrations, but I don't know if you've listened to like the Sandman audiobooks.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, they're like old-timey radio shows. And I think they're light years better than the show. That's my personal opinion.
You know what, though, I will say, and it's funny you say that, because I read the Sandman comics. One of the other hosts, Jen, is avid Sandman fan. If you see her, she has Sandman crap behind her all over her shelves when she's on the podcast. But one of the things I thought was interesting is in the Sandman, there's so many time jumps back and forth and universe jumps that if you were not familiar with it, my boyfriend, one of the things he said was, this is hard to keep track of. And then we watched the show and he was like, this is very, very cool, because he could associate a visual with the movement. So if you're not, it's kind of a thing to me where if you are not familiar with Sandman and how it works or anything about it, I could see, even though the audio drama was done completely well, which was not an audiobook. I want to clarify that, because I have so many authors that are like, I want something like that. I'm like, that is an audio drama, not an audiobook. But
yeah. You have a cast of like 20 people and music and sound effects. Yeah.
We cannot get Professor X.
The dramatic reading.
Yeah. But what was interesting is because it was time jumping, it was, and unless you just sit down and listen to it, you can lose where the hell you are in the time.
Yeah. Because I was not like, I had read a few of the comics and graphic novels, but I didn't really like all of them. So I was familiar enough with it. But I think
you needed to have some familiarity with the source material in order to catch on.
Yeah. But I think those audio dramas are probably the best I've ever heard.
Well, they're also probably millions and millions of dollars worth of audio, because they cast that. I love the cast, don't get me wrong, but it's to make something like that, I think is brilliant. But that brings another point when it comes to screenplay is casting. So people, when they read a book, even if you describe a character, right? Unlike Danielle's books where you can kind of see him behind her, but she takes pictures. She's on the cover of all of her books because they get fantasticalized. That's not a word. Whatever the correct.
That's a word now.
It's a word now. Write that down. It's a word now. But you can have some visuals on characters, but a lot of characters, even if they're described, you have an idea in your head what you think they look like, right? And I'm only going to go back to the Sandman because people, when the cast came out from the Sandman, there were so many like freaking uproars about certain parts of the casting of the Sandman, right? So
silly, because also like, he appears as different people.
Exactly, but I thought it was brilliantly cast. If you guys watch the Sandman on HBO, the entire serial convention was probably one of the most brilliant episodes of TV I have ever watched in my life.
I like that episode, but I think physically the main guy I thought fit the part, but I just found him to be dreadfully boring.
But you know, when I listened to it, the fact of the matter is he, you know, because I went back and listened to a couple episodes of the audio drama, and Sandman is not that riveting. He's a very monotone character. Like Death probably has some of the most Death and Desire have some of the most personality of the things. It's almost the people around him. And I thought,
It's true.
He
He's
does.
kind of like just
James
walking
McAvoy,
through.
that's his
and
name. Is that his
observing.
name? Right? Professor X that played him on
James
the audio
McAvoy?
drama?
James McAvoy. Yeah.
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 Okay. I said it right. Same thing. Go listen to him again. It's very monotone.
Flat.
I will.
He is flat.
I would just check it out because that character is so stoic. I think I got to use that word properly. The character is just generally so stoic until he gets mad about something.
He's very much an observer, kind of meandering through time.
Yeah.
It's true.
But I think it's
But that's kind of part of his motivation too.
It is.
Yeah.
Like he's had it taken away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Let's talk about
When
casting.
he's in prison for 75 years. Yeah.
Because casting ends up being an argument for so many people who love books. And then the casting is done, I think a lot of people don't realize, by directors and studio executive producers a lot of times have feedback onto who gets cast in a particular movie or show. And by the way, if anyone's wondering what the producers actually do, is they give all the monies. In case you're wondering where the monies come from, if you see the words executive producer, they gave a lot of the monies.
Yeah, the executive producer does the money, but the other producers, they also put all the parts together.
It's true. I'm not saying they don't do anything, but in case you're wondering where like the money comes from, it's usually the producers.
The authors don't have a say unless they put money back in, which is what Deborah Harkness did for Discovery of Witches. She put a certain portion back of what she got paid back into the production company. And that's how she got some say in casting. And she later went on to say, I wish I didn't put so much emphasis on casting, because she had a certain, she had her actors in mind to play Matthew and Diana. And then she saw the scene, one of the first scenes where Matthew's introduced with the trench coat. And she said, oh my God, I should not have, she said he looked ridiculous, because Matthew has a very specific build and whatnot. And she's like, I was so focused on casting that she's like, I should have went back and thought, should I have a say in wardrobe? Should I have a say in this or that? She's like, because I was so focused on these other things that probably weren't as relevant. She's like, I got caught up in the minutia, and that's maybe not where I should have put it. But
yeah, I don't know if she made the right
happens.
choices. I haven't been fortunate enough to be in that position, but I do think that it makes sense for writers to basically step back and let the people who are the professionals in those particular roles do their jobs. Yeah.
I think it's true, because I think a lot of people don't think about, we could sit here, all of us, and take one of our books and cast the book, right? But the problem is, really, you should choose one character that you have a certain attention on, maybe cast that, because you have no idea what the chemistry of actors and stuff like that is. That's like.
Great point.
And you can cast, you could be like, I want, James McElroy to be this person and blah to be this person, and they may have zero chemistry. Yeah. So it's like you insisted that they do that, and it doesn't end up being a good movie because they can't convey the characters and the story that you want it conveyed, because they can't do that. Mm-hmm. Or you like the look of someone. This is something that's talked about a lot. This person looks like the character.
Right.
Cool. But can they convey the character? Can
they embody them? Can they display? And sometimes it's the modality. You might think you want a series or a movie or live action. Maybe it should be done in anime. Maybe you're taking it to you haven't thought about it in a different way.
Yeah.
Maybe it should be done in, maybe you should put a little twist to it and make it, think about it from an anime standpoint or something different. And because then you might have a better chance of getting even different actors from a voice perspective. And sometimes you just have to take a step back and kind of flip the picture and look at it differently.
The last movie I saw was Sonic the Hedgehog 2.
There you go.
My daughter, we're both fans of Sonic 1. It was great. And so we saw Sonic 2 on Friday. And the whole time. Have either of you seen either of those?
I heard the
No,
story
but
of
I
how
did
John
see
Ralphio got
Pikachu.
cast.
Yeah, I did see Pikachu.
Pikachu the Detective, I think, is actually really funny
Love it.
too. So they're both, so Sonic 1 and 2 are hilarious, but in Sonic 2, there's like this kind of bad, hedgehoggy guy, like little alien. He's like this kind of orange thing called Knuckles, and he's the muscles of this world, and he just like goes around like beating things up and destroying stuff. And he talks like this, like he's not a very smart alien. And the whole time I'm like, God, that voice sort of sounds familiar, but I can't place it. And I couldn't get it, so I finally looked it up, and it was Idris Elba. Who
I would never have guessed that.
never would have guessed that. So
I
it's
think a lot
kinda
of people didn't figure out that Ryan Reynolds was Pikachu.
yeah.
Like, and I think there's been several things like that where you don't really like Rocket Raccoon, Bradley Cooper.
Right.
Like, how the
Yeah.
hell would you have ever guessed that?
Right. And these are extreme examples, but I think the point is made. Like, you would never in a million years think of any of those as your people to like portray those particular characters. Yet the casting agents are like, yeah, these are going to be like perfect for all of them.
Well, that, and what's fun is some of them are fans and want to do it. Like, they hear about it and you go, they want to do it, which I'm going to try to save this. I got a question for literary briefs around this, but I'm going to save it hopefully and remember it. But Danielle, remind me when I don't remember it, because you're not drinking.
Got
I'm
it.
drinking.
Got it.
So, but I think, I think it's fascinating. So book 3 is on its way. When do you intend to release book 3, my friend?
So book 3 will probably be in the fall of 2023. So about a year from now.
That's exciting. That's very exciting.
But the second novella should come out around the spring or early summer.
So, we talked about people's reaction to the first book. Newsletter fan wise, have you heard anything about the excitement of having book 2 come?
Yeah, actually, it's been phenomenal. So
I mentioned that, just wondering, that's why, because I mentioned it. Go ahead, continue.
So, I'm not Danielle Steele, looks wise, but people have been, I've been very fortunate that a lot of people have really liked the first book. And so they've been very, very excited about the second book. And the first book can be read as a standalone, but you get the sense that the story could continue. So a lot of people have been pretty excited about that. I've been getting messages and things, and so it's coming out a week. So the marketing has been building up, and then this week is going to be a lot more for the release next Tuesday.
And then what about the novella? What has the feedback been on the novella?
People have loved the novella as well. So it was sort of an experiment for me. I didn't really know what was going to happen with it, but the feedback has been great. People really love it. So the novella is entirely historical fiction. It's short, it's only 150 pages, so it's a very, very quick read. And everyone who's read it has loved it, which is great.
That's very, very cool. I'm excited for you, all these things, because when last we talked, it was just the one and, all of that stuff. So I'm super excited because I think a lot of authors, because we don't always hear from our fans, right? Don't realize the impact we're having and how much people want more. They want more of it. They like the voice, they like the story, they want to hear more from the author in it. And I think we can get trapped in a void a little bit of silence. That's just us going, I hear a lot of authors talk about imposter syndrome, where they go, am I good enough? Is there enough people liking my book? Should I really keep doing this? Is this a good enough story? Like, you can imposter syndrome yourself to death, not realizing that, yes, there are fans. The second you go, oh, hey, we have another one, that are like, really? Yay, and can get super excited, especially if you don't wait too long to put it out, because I think that can, create a certain effect in and of itself.
Yeah. Well, there's also the writing speed. But I do, as amazing as my first book is, I actually do think that the second book is even better.
It's going to be. the fact is I was actually having this discussion, may have been on the podcast, but the other day I had an author ask me, and I brought this up, and it's a little piece of writing advice before shameless self-promotion. And Danielle, I'm going to let you have the last question after I pontificate for a moment here. But
Yes, ma'am.
the thing is that literally from when you start your second book to when you finish your second book, you're already a better writer than what you were at the start of the second book. Yeah. And I think this is what can trap people into rewriting a manuscript is, listen, the moment you put words on a piece of paper, you're going to be a better author than you were before you put those words on a piece of paper. So yes, I can tell you, Rob, because we're going to have you on this podcast more as you keep from, producing and stuff like that. So encouragement, if any, for doing that. But, by book 5, 6, 10, you're going to be a way better writer than book 1. And trust me, when you look at book 1, you're going to be like, I should rewrite this, but you shouldn't, because you're always going to be a better writer at the end. And if you know that and you just keep writing, you're going to get better at it. You're going to find all the little things.
I'm already doing that. So the audiobook for The Prisoner of Paradise came out in August. And first of all, talk about audiobooks. The narrator for The Prisoner of Paradise did such an incredible job. And I'm saying this from a non-biased perspective. I listen to a lot of audiobooks like you. It's just a time thing. So I'm always listening to one and reading one, but like walking the dog, going on, riding in the car, whatever. I'm listening to an audiobook. So I listen to a ton of them, and his narration is one of the best I've ever heard because, like I said, the book takes place in different timelines. It takes place in Italy. So there's multiple nationalities, all sorts of ages and genders and everything. And he nailed it all.
Who is your narrator? Let's do a little shameless plug for him.
His name is Zach Alamon, and he's with Tantor Media. So the audiobook is phenomenal. Cool. But when I was listening to it, there were times when I was listening to I'm listening to it from a different perspective, like listening to the writing of it, right? So I was thinking, man, I should have written that sentence better.
No, it's funny. So I had an author that was listening to her audiobook and wrote me this frantic email that said the timeline is messed up. And I realized it by hearing it, that it wasn't caught by editing or anything. It's not huge. For the record, when she showed it to me, I was like, nobody's going to see this, right? Like, you saw it because you are so, you're in bed with this story. You're in your jammies, however you go to sleep at night or not, some of us, and you're in bed with this story. You know this story like the back of your hand. You know the sounds it makes, what it smells like, what it tastes like. You know this story. And I think as authors, it's good to listen to your audiobooks, but it can be very, very difficult if you cannot separate yourself from, again, you were a different writer now, because now you've written even more stuff. This was written back here, and you can't, it's not like you can wave a magic wand and fix everything. We do hear stuff, and I know when we read books out loud, or somebody wants us to come read, and you read from the first book, and you're like, I'm going to pick the chapter that I like because there's stuff in chapters 3 and 5 that just drive me nuts, so I'll read 7. Mm-hmm. We can be our worst critics listening. But because that glacier is in our head, no one else will hear these things that we have a problem listening to and going, oh my goodness. We
are our own worst critics. Yeah.
We really, truly are. It's crazy.
I always have the computer. Yeah. Before I actually have the computer read to me, before I send it off to an editor. I think it's really important to listen and also read out loud.
Oh, reading out loud or having somebody read it to you. So fun story. This is a tip I tell a lot of authors. I'm like, I don't care who it is. It can be your kid. It can be your significant other. It can be a best friend. Even if they just read a chapter, just have somebody read it to you. Close your eyes while they're reading it to you. Don't look at them. Mm-hmm. Close your eyes and go, okay, wait, that doesn't make sense. Because that's when you're going to hear it. You're not even going to hear it necessarily when you read it to yourself. Again, glacier, you know what's supposed to be there. It's kind of like the self-editing. You're like, oh, that's on that page. I know I put it there, or you put way too much of it there. But if you have somebody else, you close your eyes, totally different voice. You could have your daughter hand her the book and read it to you, and you'd go, "Oh, that's weird. Yep, need to change."
And it's
Then I'm
even
hearing
I
better
read
with
it out
monotone
loud to
voice,
somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah, I read it out loud, and that's how I get it. I'm just like, just sit and listen, and I'll read it. And then as I'm reading it, I'll go, "Oh crap, I gotta put yeah, like that's how." And then I had a friend do it, and he was like, he looked at me, he goes, "That makes no sense at all." And I'm like, "No, it totally." And then the minute I have to start explaining it, he stops and he goes, "If you have to start explaining it to me," he's like, "either you need to write whatever you're about to explain needs to go in the book, or you need to cut that." And I'm like, "Good point.
Yeah,
Never mind."
exactly. You can't argue with your readers. Yeah. Are you
Yep.
both familiar with Saul Stein?
No, I'm not. Erica, are you?
It's ringing a bell, but it's my drunk post-it gnome is not
So he
finding it.
died
So-
probably about 20 years ago, but he was an author, agent, publisher, and editor. And he wrote a book called Stein on Writing. And he edited
My
like
editors
some of
brought that up. Yep.
yeah, he edited like some of the biggest authors like in literary history and was an agent and stuff. And he also was a writer himself. So Stein on Writing is a phenomenal book about writing. And one of the things that he recommends is not only reading things out loud or having someone read to you, but when you do it, read in as monotone a voice as possible.
Yes.
Because when people are reading, most of the time in their heads, it's kind of just like this sort of quick monotone voice, right? So you need to know and make sure that the emotion that you want to convey or whatever from just the words is coming out.
I've done that, but I've also, from doing an audiobook as well, I have now changed the inflections because that's what I learned. After I listened to my own audiobook, I'm like, oh, the actor took it in a totally different direction than I would have. I'm like, interesting. So now I read the lines like I try to read them in 3 different ways, 3 different emotions. The way I intend it to come across. And then I try to go back and say, how else will this come across? And read it. Because after hearing the audiobook, I was like, didn't expect it to go like they'll kind of, if there's no direction, they'll whisper it and I'm like, should I put a direction on how I want this to go?
This goes back to what we were saying before. There's all these different ways of not only telling a story, but even saying a line. I was actually going over this with my daughter, my 7-year-old daughter, just the other day about acting. We were taking like one sentence that was maybe like 6 words and reading it with different emphasis on the different words and how to say it, right? It's just like, it could be a completely different meaning.
It's true. And it's funny because when you talk about narrators and giving them direction and pronunciation and stuff like that, however they're reading it is probably how your readers are reading it as well. Not 100% of the time, but probably 90% of the time.
Yeah.
That's how the reader, it's kind of the whole thing about when you send an email or a text message, only about, what do they say, 10% of the emotion gets conveyed that you truly want to convey.
That's why you need emojis.
Yeah. And that's, it's funny because, you know, my dad was a victim of this. Dad, if you're listening, I love you so much in my heart. But he would type all caps in emails. I'm sure all of us have parental units that have done a similar thing where, and I'm like, Dad, it means you're yelling. He's like, no, it doesn't. I just that way I'm typing. And I'm like, no. Let me just explain etiquette. It means you're yelling at us in your email. And he's like, but I'm not yelling. And I'm like, cool, but you are. And he doesn't realize that sometimes, like, I could say, a brief, no, I don't like that idea. And people could be like, oh my God, she didn't like the idea. She hates it. She hates me. No, I just didn't like that idea. But if you're not careful on how you say things, it can come across like that,
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm going to start putting emojis into my books.
I actually have one of my books has emojis because it has text messages in it. So it has emojis in the book. Very proud of that. It's
because nothing makes something crystal clear like a little yellow smiley face.
Yes.
All is right with the world.
Yeah, but Erica, what you just said was actually quite reassuring. Yeah, about like how, however the audiobook narrator is reading something is probably how someone else is going to read it. Because as incredible as Zach Alamon is, I think there were maybe 2 words that he mispronounced, literally out of 100,000. But again,
Always is.
the author, and those 2 words, I was like, ugh. But you're right. Other people aren't going to be reading it that way, so it's perfectly okay.
And I'll tell you, nobody's listening going, oh, he mispronounced that. Like, very few people get the audiobook and have read the actual book in such close proximity. People don't, I think for the most part, you can email me if you do this, totally, drinkingwithauthors@gmail.com. Take the audiobook, the book, and read along with the audiobook. I don't know anybody who does that.
I have.
I
but
did
not at the same time. I've switched off.
No,
Yeah,
I've read the book and stuff, but you don't like sit there and go, did they say this correctly? Did they say this?
No.
No.
And I don't even mean like doing both. Like I've done it by like chapters kind of thing. And
Yeah.
Amazon has that feature, which is pretty cool. But you're right. No one's like reading it while listening. Yeah. Although, this is not that, but I think I got like a star knocked off of a review because this woman didn't like the fact that I used one particular word twice in my book out of 100,000.
Oh my gosh.
Service was excellent. Food was great. My lime and my Moscow Mule was not as fresh as it could be. 1 star.
Exactly.
I've talked about that so many times.
Yep.
I love that Yelp review because it is the epitome of online reviews.
Yep.
Keyboard balls.
Yeah.
100%.
Exactly. Okay, Danielle, ask your final question. We're running over. This is all your fault.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. All right. I'm sorry. What is the most that you've learned between, as a writer, between book 1 and book 2 about yourself?
About myself, that I can be, and that there's always room for improvement, that you can never stop learning. And I'm going to do 2 things, sorry, but they're connected. One is that you can never stop learning and there's always room for improvement, but also that this whole entire process and business is a marathon, and it's a mountain to climb, and you cannot expect to reach the summit the very first time you kind of run out of the gate.
Good answer. I like that.
Okay. Shameless self-promotion time. Pick that book back up. Let's talk about it and where to find you.
So again, my name is Rob Samborn, and this is the first book, The Prisoner of Paradise. And this is the second book coming out next Tuesday, Painter of the Damned. The novella that is out now is called The Swordsman of Venice. And so The Swordsman of Venice is only available on Amazon, but The Prisoner of Paradise and Painter of the Damned are available everywhere or will be. And for my social media, first of all, my website is robsamborn.com. And by the way, I know previously, maybe like a week ago or something, you had somebody on your show named Wendy Samford, I think. And she was talking about the spelling of her name. It's almost identical. So Samborn, B-O-R-N. And so my website's robsamborn.com, which is also pretty much all of my handles on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, you name it. And I think that's it.
Wonderful. Well, we are so glad you came back on the show with us. It's so much fun having you here.
Well, Erica, it has been a blast. I absolutely love talking and drinking with you. Danielle, you as well. It's been wonderful meeting you. I look forward to both of your projects as well. So Danielle, actually, you were going to quickly tell us about your work, right? I know we're running over, but
okay, this has turned into shameless self-promotion about you, Danielle. Go.
Birth of the Fae series, catch it everywhere. You can catch me on birthofthefae.com, and that's it for me because I know Erica's going to shoot me if we go any longer. Exactly.
Okay.
I know that.
Only people on YouTube saw that. That's okay.
Yeah.
Now, this has been Drinking with Authors, guys. I've been your host, Erica Lance. Our sponsor today has been Skunk Brothers Spirits, coupon code DWA10. Check them out. My amazing co-host has been Danielle Orsino.
Please like and subscribe and give us a little feedback because now you've been drinking and those keyboard balls have finally kicked in, so you can tell us what you really think.
Yes, and it better all be good because we've had Rob Samborn and he is amazing, and we will catch you guys next time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.